Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking some time out of your day to join us for the last in our 15-minute best practices series of client manager for assessment and evaluation at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. So today we're going to go through some basic item statistics and best practices
Hey,
for
Eric.
interpreting them, understanding how they're derived, what they mean, and what
Hey, Eric.
values.
Eric. Crap.
Hello,
Hey, hey, you were breaking out really,
Carter.
really bad. I'm sorry.
Carter.
Hey, Eric.
Hey,
Hey, can you hear me?
oh, you're breaking up right now. I don't know if
Yeah, I'm trying to find
I
somewhere
don't know
with
which.
a.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm trying to find somewhere with like a line.
So was
We're gonna go.
Hang on, I'm going to type to you on Skype.
Okay. We're gonna use Daniel's office.
Oh, you guys are working in here?
Yeah,
Party time.
I'm about to be.
Did you show Eric?
No.
Dude, show him our stuff.
We're on a webinar right now.
Oh.
All right. Is this any better?
Yeah, I can hear you clear as day now. Not
Okay,
breaking up
cool.
at all.
Sorry, I thought I was going to be able to do that just like with my computer sitting out in the common area while we were boxing, but that's not going to work at all. So I'll just edit out these minutes. If you want to go ahead and start over.
Okay. So when you toss yourself on mute, I'll give it like a 10-second dead space and then I'll start.
Okay, sweet. Sorry about that.
No worries. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the last in our series of 15-minute best practices. Today's about an item analysis and interpreting statistics on your questions. My name is Eric Ermie. I'm the Director of Client Solutions for ExamSoft, and once upon a time, I was the Program Manager for Evaluation and Assessment at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. One of the things we're going to do today is just go through what the basic stats are, go through some general guidelines for interpreting them. We'll go through some examples so you can see what they look like, and we'll try and give you an overview and just some best practices, some simple things you can do to make understanding these statistics easier. Now, there's a lot of different views on these things out there. There's a lot of people who think it should be done one way or another. So no single viewpoint is always going to be correct, and not everything I say about how to interpret an item can be applied in 100% of situations. But we're trying to give you some of the simpler things that you can interpret easily that will help you make some better decisions about your items as you make scoring decisions going forward, or as you're evaluating the quality of items in your curriculum. So like I said, we'll go through some types of stats. We'll take a look at the actual item analysis report, what that looks like and how to read it, and then we'll go over some general statistical guidelines and examples. There's a few different main stats that I'm going to focus on today. There's other stats out there, but again, I feel like these are the simplest ones and the ones that are a good starting point. Let's start with the item difficulty, which is a decimal representation of the difficulty of the question. It uses the percentage of students who got it right. So if 96% of the students get a question right, your item difficulty would be 0.96. And if 20% of your students get something right, your item difficulty would be 0.2. So the lower the decimal number, the higher the difficulty, and vice versa. Now, after you take a look at that item difficulty, what percentage of your students got it right, one of the next things you might want to take a look at are some different subgroups of populations within your exam takers. So with that, you've got the upper 27% performance and the lower 27% performance. The upper 27 and lower 27 are quite simply what percentage of the top 27% of students got that question correct. And when I say top 27% of students, I mean top 27% of scorers on that exam. It doesn't incorporate other exams. So how did the top 27% of scorers on that particular exam do on the question? And how did the bottom 27% of scorers do on that particular question on that exam? That brings us to the discrimination index, and those two things are what feeds the discrimination index. So the discrimination index lets you know whether the item is doing a good job of differentiating between your best performing students and your worst performing students. And all it does is takes the upper 27% performance and subtracts the lower 27% performance to give you a decimal. So if 90% of your upper 27 got it right and 60% of your lower 27 got it right, you'd have a discrimination index of 0.3. And we'll go through some guidelines later, but that would, in most cases, be pretty good. It shows that the item did a good job of weeding out who really didn't know as much and who really knew their stuff. It gives you a nice discrimination and a nice difference between those groups. Now, the point by serial is kind of a deeper discrimination type statistic. It gives you two things. It helps you determine the discrimination of the particular item by not just including the performance difference in the upper 27 and lower 27, but it actually includes all of the students and how they did on that question. And it also compares how students did on that question, every single one of those students, how they did on the entire exam as a whole. So, did this question, if you got it right, did getting this question right correlate with doing well on the exam as a whole? If it did, great, because that means your question is a good representation of the content, the material, and that knowing this question and getting it right was an indicator that you understood the whole of the content. Or it could be the opposite. If getting this question right had no correlation or poor correlation with doing well on the exam as a whole, then there could be something wrong with the item itself, or it could mean that whatever the way you wrote the item, the item doesn't really represent the content as a whole. And so this isn't a good indicator of a student understanding of what you were trying to assess them on. Now, those are some of the basics. We'll walk through some different examples here in a moment. We'll start, though, with taking a look at what the report looks like. So when you take a look at the report, first things that you always want to start with is the p-value, or the item difficulty. What percentage of the class got it right? In this case, it's about 96%, or 0.96 item difficulty. Again, the closer to 1 it is, the easier. The closer to 0 it is, the harder it is. Then you're taking a look at the upper and lower. So what percentage of my top 27 got it right? Okay, 100% of those in this case. And what percentage of my lower 27 got it right? 89. That'll give us our discrimination index here of 0.1. And then this is kind of a mastery level question, so we'll get into some more examples, but in this case, even though it's a mastery level question, there's still a little bit of discrimination there. And as you look at the point by serial, did this item correlate with performing well in the exam as a whole? And it does. When you take a look at a breakdown here, you'll see how many students chose each answer choice, the percentage of students who chose each answer choice, and then you can see those same point by serial statistics or discrimination index statistics by each individual answer choice. So what that would tell you is if you're taking a look at this and you see a discrimination index on an item that's negative, as long as it's the wrong answer, that's good, because if it's a wrong answer, you want it to the worst students to have chosen it and the best students to have not chosen that answer choice. But if you see a wrong answer choice that has maybe a positive discrimination index, you might need to take a look at that particular answer choice, because it could mean there was potentially 2 right answers to the question. Last thing, you can take a look at how the upper 27% and lower 27% did, just not on the correct answer, which we've already taken a look at, 189.66, or it rounds here for 90, 190, but the students who didn't choose the correct answer that were in these groups, where did they end up on the question? So it gives you a breakdown of that. Now, some general guidelines. I say these are general guidelines because I don't believe in hard and fast rules on statistical interpretation. There are a lot of different places out there that say anything below a 0.2 point by serial has to be thrown out. Anything below 50% of the class getting it right has to be thrown out. I don't believe in that, because there are definitely some items that will have less than a 0.2 point by serial or less than 50% getting them correct that could still be valuable, good quality items that assess your students well. So you really have to take all of these things into account when you're taking a look at an item and deciding whether or not to keep it in an exam and whether or not it's a good item. But some desired ranges, it depends a little bit on your intention. Let's start again with item difficulty. An acceptable item difficulty is more of a correlation with your intention. If you intended this item to be a mastery level item, something you want to test everybody on, make sure they know it, but you expect all of your class to know it, then you want that difficulty to be in the 0.9 to 1 range, or 90 to 100%. Now, if you desire a discriminating question, then it's not acceptable for 100% of the class to get a discriminating question right. Something's wrong. You either didn't write it hard enough, or your question's out there and your students maybe have a copy of it somewhere, whatever it might be. If you desire a discriminating question, you want to lower item difficulty, maybe somewhere in the 0.4 to 0.7 range, or 40 to 70% of the class getting it right. Your upper 27%, it's one of the few that I'll give you sort of a guideline on, and it's my personal guideline, so you make your own as you're comfortable. But on the upper 27%, if less than 60% of that group is getting a question right, you might need to take a look if there's some issues with that question, because that means that 40%, 50% of your best performing students, the students who did the absolute highest performance on the exam, aren't getting this question. And that's not a group that you generally want to discriminate between, because you want your best students to get the hardest questions right. Now, also, one of the true hard and fast rules is that if less of your upper 27% get a question correct than your lower 27%, then there's definitely an issue. The lone exception to that would be if 100% of your bottom 27 got it and 98% of your top 27 got it right, well then, that's just one student who accidentally clicked something wrong or goofed on a question that doesn't tell you anything. But if 80% of your lower 27% get something right and 30% of your upper 27 gets it right, that's not a discrimination that you want. That's a poor discrimination. Again, with the lower 27, it depends on your intention, but you never want it to be higher than the upper 27, except for those fluke instances that I mentioned. And as low as 0 can be acceptable, although it's not usually likely. And as high as 100 can be acceptable, but really only if it's truly a mastery question. Lots of people say things are mastery questions that are just really easy questions. So you've got to know, based on your content and your intentions, that this is a key important piece of content that isn't that complex, but that it's vital to assess to make sure they know it, and that really meets the criteria for a mastery level. The discrimination index, acceptable discrimination varies. If it's 100% of the class getting it right because it's truly a mastery question, fine, 0 is okay. For the most part, you want it to be 0.2 and above. Lower levels are acceptable for mastery, like I mentioned, but when you get into those higher discriminations, 0.2 isn't necessarily good enough. You might want to go 0.3 or higher at that point, or even 0.4 and higher. The thing that I usually say is that the lower the percent correct on the item as a whole goes, the higher your discrimination index needs to go for it to be a valid item in your exam that you want to keep, and for it to be really a good assessor of your students. Similar to point by serial. Acceptable, you see in the 0.2 range. 0.2 indicates correlation with doing well on this question means doing well on the exam as a whole. But again, lower levels are acceptable for mastery. And again, the lower the percentage, the higher you want your point by serial to be. So you would want 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 if you have really highly discriminating items that less of the class gets correct. With any statistics, it's important to remember that the context matters. So I'm going to show you some examples now that have maybe good or bad sub-statistics, but the context is what determines whether or not you need to make a decision on those items. So with these examples, if you take a look at this first one here, very low, nearly non-existent discrimination index, low, not very good point by serial. Those things would cause some people to throw it out, but this is where that intention part comes in. So if you were to look at the content of this question, and if it truly was a mastery level question that you intended everybody to get right, but you wanted to make sure you assessed, then that's fine, because 98% of the class got it correct. That could be an okay stat. Now, if this was supposed to be a little bit more difficult, or if this was just, if I saw these stats and I looked and it wasn't a really truly important concept and it was just some factoid question or nothing, then it's kind of meaningless, and something either needs to be done with it. Maybe throw it out, or maybe you just don't use it next year, but there could be a decision there based on that. Looking at this next item, you take a look and you start here. Let's start with the percent correct. 66% correct, which is a little bit low. Not awful, not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but a little bit low. So let's go to the secondary statistics and see, okay, 0.36 discrimination index, that's phenomenal. 0.28 point by serial, that's great as well. And when you look, you've got a 0.82, so 82% of your top 27% of performers are getting it right, and 46% of your bottom 27% of performers are getting it wrong. That's a really nice spread, and it's a good chunk of that upper 27, so you can know that they were really understanding it. One of the other things to look at here is what you can kind of see is the students were doing a little bit of process elimination here. Everybody chose something, but your top students narrowed it down to C, D, and E. They were able to completely eliminate A and B, but your top students were able to get it down to C, D, and E, and then most of them were able to discern from there that D was the correct answer, and a couple ended up on C and E. Now your lower performing students, they weren't able to narrow it down as much. So while 46% of them still got the question correct, if you look, for the most part they eliminated A. For the most part they eliminated E, but they basically got it down to B, C, and D. And there's 19%, 21%, and 46%. So they were essentially guessing between the three with a little bit heavier guessing on this one. So you can start to get into the mindset of your students. You know, what was it that was tripping up the people who missed it? Well, A didn't really confuse them and E didn't really confuse them, but B and C, they weren't able to discern. So you can take a look at what options B and C were in the content, and you can help them understand, here's how you would know the difference between when B or C are applicable and when it really should be D. And it becomes a teaching point for the students and a learning opportunity for them. As you look at this next example, we start with 0.25 discrimination index, 0.22 point by serial. Both of those would be in the acceptable to good ranges, except as we look here, only 36% of the class got this correct. And your discrimination index, while it is 0.25, is the difference between 52% of your upper students and 27% of your lower students. Even though that would normally be a nice gap, only half of your best students getting something correct is really an issue. And that's something that warrants a lot further consideration. Maybe you take a look here and you start to investigate at that point, all right, where did my top students go if they weren't on the correct answer? A good quarter of your top students chose B. Is there any validity to B? If there is, great, go ahead and accept it as a second answer. And then combined, what you would have is somewhere in the 0.76 range on the upper 27 and in the 0.44 range for the lower 27, and that'd be fine. So this might be an example where B is correct. But your best students, there was a little bit on A, a little bit on E, a little bit on C, but for the most part, they were choosing between B and D. The bottom students, clear guessing across the board. They really weren't able to eliminate any answer choice, and maybe they could eliminate E a little bit, but for the most part, while your top students eliminated a couple and then guessed, your bottom students couldn't even eliminate a couple before guessing. They are just all over the place. So this could be an item that would warrant being thrown out given the low total and given the low upper 27, or it could be one that warrants having an additional answer accepted. As we go on to a couple more examples here, this is the classic reverse discrimination here. So something's wrong. We take a look at this, 55% of the class got it right, and that's sometimes fine, but a negative 0.57 discrimination index and a negative 0.43 point by serial, which means doing well in this question, actually meant you did poorly on the exam. It didn't mean that you understood the exam as a whole or did well on the exam as a whole. It means you did poorly. And a negative 0.57 discrimination index means 83% down here of the bottom are getting right, and only 25% of the upper are getting it. When you look, you take a look at C here, and you see that 75% of your best students are on C, and 17% of your lower, so that's actually got a very positive discrimination. And if you look up here, the 37% of the class ended up on it. This could be something where conflicting faculty members said something that confused people, or maybe you were adding some extra information to that question stem to try and make it a little bit of a harder question, and you accidentally added some information that the best students recognized as having an impact on the answer, and the worst students didn't pick that up, and they didn't recognize that it could have an impact on the answer. So again, this could be an accept both answers or throw it out. I would never keep something with this negative an index in the exam. So this is something that either needs to be fixed in the item level going forward, or it could be that, again, it could be something on the teaching side with the content. Last couple of examples here. This is really one of those gray areas, and you've got to go with your best instinct, and where I want to really highlight how much context matters. 51% is okay. 0.22 discrimination index is good. It means it discriminates. 0.18 by 0 is a little low, but 0.2 is pretty good. So you're right on the verge there. If you look, 60% of your upper got it, 42% of your lower. This is a teeter-totter question. Maybe it needs to be kept, maybe it needs to be thrown out, maybe you need to accept A. But the stats are, all they're telling you here is that you really need to look at the content, and you need to have somebody who understood how this was taught, when this was taught, and what the student expectation was, make a decision about this question, because the stats don't give you a clear answer on what to do. And then lastly, just another one of those highly discriminating questions that gives you some great results. 71% of the class got it right, including 90% of the upper 27. So your best students are getting it. Even most of your middle students are probably getting it. And a little over half of your bottom ones are getting it. This is really, really nice. And you can also kind of take a look at what's the exam taker thinking. Your best students knew it cold. Your bottom students, they knew it well enough to eliminate A, eliminate C, mostly eliminate E, and they were down to D and B when it came to the guessing for the most part. So what is it? Maybe that is the exact discrimination you're looking for. The best students are able to identify the difference between these answers and choose the correct one, and the lowest students aren't. So where do we fit into all of this? We try and give you the data you need. We have simplified and detailed versions of the item analysis reports, so whatever level of comfortability your faculty has with these things, we provide a report for that. Our historical item analysis stores you some data in your bank by version of the question. So if you've made revisions to your questions, it'll store all the different versions that question's ever been in, all the different iterations, and it'll store that data inside the bank so you can take a look at the stats by each version of the question. You can take a look at the stats for an item by every different assessment it's been on, so you'll see a list of assessments and its statistical performance on each one of those assessments, and an aggregate. So on every assessment it was ever used on, what are the stats for these questions? And it'll automatically update every time a question is used. More and more stats are being added to the bank, and so that bank holds all that historical data to help you refine items and make decisions. The other thing is that we give you the ability to pull up an item analysis by discipline or question author or category. So if you have multiple authors of an exam and you want to pull a report of just so-and-so's questions for them, so that they can take a look through their stats, but they don't need to look at everyone else's, you can do that. Or in integrated curriculums where you might have 10 pathology questions, 10 biochemistry questions, 10 anatomy questions, 10 physiology questions, etc. You could pull them by discipline as long as you've categorized the questions, so that you can provide back to the faculty who teach in those different disciplines a report that's just about their items. So with that, there were some questions in the chat window here that I'll address. One of the questions that was asked was about overall question statistics for an exam. We do have a KR20 that is available within our system, and it's something that, it can give you a good indication of how reliable the exam scores are on the whole. Those exam scores, the reliability of those, meaning if you were to give another exam over the same content, are the students likely to perform just as well on that exam as they did on this one? It's trying to get you to that level of knowledge where you can say, is there variance in this performance based on an unreliability of the tool, the exam itself, or is it a reliable, accurate accounting of whether the students knew that content? So we do have that. Now, a couple things to note: don't live and die by it. Again, it can very, very, very easily be influenced by the number of questions in an exam and the number of students. If you have even a low to mid number of students and a low to mid number of questions, a few things could just throw it off wildly. So you could see really bad numbers that are maybe a little bit meaningless. It's really a better stat for when you have a lot of questions and a lot of students. Additionally, one of the people said, how is it possible and how easy is it to change item scores? A lot of what I've been talking about here is, do you need to keep an item in an exam and throw it out? Do you need to accept multiple answers? And then obviously using those stats to determine the viability of the question for future usage. Within our system, we provide a really, really easy rescoring tool. And what it enables you to do is see these stats, go in, open up the question, and you could say, I want to select maybe A and C, hit update, and it will automatically go through and rescore everyone who took the exam, so that anybody who got either of those answers would get the correct, or you could throw it out of the exam entirely and rescore everybody's exam accordingly. So you just hit an update button after you've made your scoring changes, and it instantly goes through and rescores all those exams. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that you enjoyed this week's series. We do have some more webinars coming up, so be sure to check out our website to see those. We've got some more coming out for you here in June and in July. Have a great rest of the spring, and thank you for joining.